Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a disassembly maintenance video for you on this big old guy right here. This is the Chaves Knives Liberation, I think 229. Interesting piece. Holy crap, is this thing big and thick, and it's a situation. But I'm going to go ahead and do some disassembly and give some first impressions. But in terms of overall construction, right now we are dead centered, so that's not a concern. The detent on this guy is a little overstrong, and especially if you have any lock bar tension, this guy ain't opening. So I'm sort of hoping that this is in need of lubrication, and that once I do that, the detent will soften up just the slightest bit. The action is otherwise quite nice, and the knife is otherwise running quite well, but that is my general sort of feeling here. So let's go ahead and pop this guy open. This is an interesting knife. This is actually the first Chaves knife. Free spinning pivot. Oh, snap. Can I? Nah, not enough friction on the finger there. All right. This is the first Chaves knife I've had on my channel, actually. I have, been aware of his designs for many years, and very often, though, they've been a little bit tricky to get, as this one sort of is, too. This is, by the way, a special edition from Urban EDC Supply, which is a solid little company, but, and they did it with this special pattern on there. But, there were lots of other versions of it out there, and they're all, this is cosmetic, right? It's this texturing here. But, this is wanting to disassemble from the backside, which is fine, I suppose. But looks like I need to pop it open from this side, too. The screw is going straight through the titanium, like under that skull eye there, which, oh boy. This is not wanting to pop open. So rather than trying to twist harder with that bit, what I'm going to do is swap over to this guy. If you're curious, by the way, about any of the tools I'm using, this is from a little torque set I have from Weehaw here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop over this guy here, and because this gives me the advantage of the ability to smoothly apply more torque. And indeed, it sure looks like, yeah, I was able to break that free. That was just over-tightened a little bit. And all of this, by the way, is T8 in the back here. But it looks like this goes all the way through to the other side, which is kind of interesting. And then it looks like probably the same thing, and this is also very torqued. So let's go ahead and loosen it up again. There we go. Pop that loose. And now slip that the rest of the way out. And the knife comes apart. Okay. This is indeed pretty dirty. One thing that's worth noting, by the way, is that I actually got this guy on the secondary market. I have a blog. I have a Patreon page where people who care to support the channel can do so. It's a wonderful thing. I appreciate every damn day the patrons who, make the channel possible effectively. But one of the things, for my Patreon page, I have a Discord. For my Discord, I have a place where people can buy and sell gear, basically, because we're all gear enthusiasts, right? That's one of the things that brings us together. But one of my patrons actually had this guy up for sale, and I was thinking to myself the other day, because, I chat with a number of knife folks on a regular basis, and a bunch of people had been talking about the Chaveses, and so I thought to myself, I should get one of those. And then I saw that, it was like, I'm going to get one of those. So I just went ahead and I bought it off the patron, right? And I think helped to finance Norseman or something for him at that point. Either way, no argument there. But so this guy is used, and so that would explain some of the wear that we're seeing here. Not like wear in the sense of like, oh my God, wear. It's clearly been used. It's not factory fresh, which these days is getting to be rarer on the channel. But anyways, so this guy came from him first, and by the way, I'm cleaning this off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. One of the downsides, I know you were all wondering, what could be a downside of the pandemic? But one of the many is that 90% rubbing alcohol is basically unobtainable, at least through my normal sources. And so as a result, I've switched to 70%. That's not quite as good for what I'm doing here. It's better for sanitizing, but not as good for knife cleaning. But nonetheless, that is a thing. That is a downside. But go ahead and clean this out here. The clip, by the way, is internally screwed. We can see that the clip there goes into there, and that goes right into the back of the skull there, which I'm going to go on ahead and I'm going to level with you. This right here is a constant feature of the Chaves knives, and that's the biggest reason that I've never owned a Chaves. I always respect his work. Some of the design work is excellent, and it is very much a design-forward knife, right? If you love Chavez's work, you're gonna be over the moon with the design. The construction's absolutely solid, but the design is always controversial. Not only in the fact that it is a big, heavy, thick frame lock, but in the fact that it's got the big old freaking skull on the back side of it. And for whatever reason, Chaves has steadfastly refused to produce any of his knives without that clip. Even though I know that for a lot of people, in fact, when I posted this guy up on Instagram, a lot of people's very first reaction was just like, oh my God, that's a cool looking knife, but then you flipped it over. I'm like, yeah, I feel you. That's not a thing for me. Some people love it. Clearly Chaves does, right? But, he's made the decision, and, hey, look, it's his right. He's a maker, right? But he's made the decision that that's an important part of his brand, and he wants to stick by it. And as a result, I already know this knife ain't sticking around, right? It's just, I'm not going to let that bias my general opinion. I'm going to talk about the clip, and it's going to be ugly, right? That call that some bias anyways, but at the same time, the knife is, I can still acknowledge the excellence of a knife, even if it's got one design choice that's just like, really? Okay. That's a thing. I showed it to my wife, and she just started laughing, like, really? That's a bit much, I think was her phrasing. Anyways, I digress. But Chaves is one of the better-known makers that I've never had on the channel. And so I'm glad I was able to do that. And I appreciate the patrons who make it possible for me to see, hey, expensive-ass knife. Let me just buy it real quick. That is a real privilege I've gotten. I'm very happy about it. So, okay, let's go ahead and put this guy back together. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do it the same way it was done originally. I don't know that it matters, but I want to make sure that it doesn't, so to speak. And that is with the pivot on the lock side first. It's a little more convenient to do it the other way, but whatever. I'll work with it here. So I'll go ahead and I'll use some 10-weight nano oil here. By the way, this is running on bearings. That is kind of one of the oddities of it, is that it is this big, massive, overbuilt sort of piece, but it's running on bearings, which are historically a little bit less, they're less robust to some circumstances, right, to like dust and things like that. Not the end of the world, but it is sort of an interesting choice. Very often, big old, thick, heavy knives run on washers because, well, they don't need the super speedy action of the bearings. One thing I should actually check real quick, and I just lubricated the detent ball hole, but one thing I want to check is to make sure there's not a burr around the detent ball hole. Is there? I want to make sure that there's not a little raised up metal lip at the edge of this, and there doesn't appear to be. If I put my finger across it, I feel the detent ball hole, but it's pretty, yeah, okay, there's not. So, because that can often lead to an overstrong detent that is otherwise dialed in. And by the way, some might disagree that this is overstrong, right? But at least for my purposes, yeah, this is a little much. Makes the thumb stud a little less comfortable to use if you have any pressure on the lock bar. But what I have done there is put a little bit of lubrication on the detent ball hole as well as on the track there surrounding it, and that should give me a little bit easier deployment. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just put the stop pin into here. Not that it's crucial to have it over here, but it just that way I know it's in position. We don't have to worry about that. Next step is going to be to put a little lubrication down on this side and drop a set of bearings on there. One of the things that's very tricky for me as a reviewer, and especially as I have less time than ever, is trying to avoid, being stuck in my own desires, my own patterns. I acknowledge that, the things I like in a knife are not always the things people like in a knife, right? And so I try very hard not to just not just to review stuff I like, but to look at stuff that, may be very appealing to other people, even if it's fundamentally not to me. And so, this is sort of an effort in that direction. This does a couple of things that I really don't care for. It's, the big, beefy, thick, overbuilt side, the clip, etc. But I can still acknowledge that it's really nicely made. And so, I'm happy to take a look here and to give it a fair shake. But I'm really trying very hard to give it a fair shake. I want all of the shaking here to be fair. Let's go ahead and put a little Loctite on this guy. I'll put the pivot in first because I'm going to have to flip this guy over in order to do those other screws because they're coming in from the show side. Okay, this is free spinning. That's right. So I'm going to try and put a little pressure on the other side there. Have I cross-threaded? What's up here? No. No, it's just a little bit of... There we go. Okay, next step is going to be to close the knife up a little bit. Next step is going to be to realize that I have closed the knife up with the backspacer in the wrong position. Then I'm going to open the knife and do that. Okay, beautiful. Now what I need to do is get these screws in there. Remember that the screws are going straight through into the titanium there, so I need to make sure that everything is in proper alignment. One of them is going in, from the looks of it, behind the skull, so I can't see all the way through, but the other one I can see all the way through, so I'm just going to kind of look down through that hole there and make sure that things look to be in correct positioning. Then I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of thread locker on the end there. And I'll drop this guy through. My goal here is not to just like ram it home and push the backspacer, just to, you know, as with all things, be a little bit ginger with it. It's the Weasley family motto, of course. Like 10 people just started laughing and everyone else is like, Weasley, who the heck is this guy talking about? Anyways, I digress. But yeah, so you can do that gingerly. Why is this? Okay. It just wasn't threaded right, so I just backed the screw up a little bit until I kind of felt it skip. That tells me, okay, I'm right at the start of the thing, and then I just push it in there and call it a day. And now we tighten, and I'll go ahead and I'll tighten. Give it a little bit more tightness than maybe I might otherwise. Just make sure things stick in there. Ooh, the tent is still pretty spicy. Yowza. Okay, no blade play, though. And it is a little smoother. That's for sure. And if I don't have any pressure on the lock bar at all, it pops loose no problem. It's just very sensitive to lock bar pressure. This is, by the way, one of the problems with a frame lock relative to a liner lock, right? It's much easier to not rest your finger on the lock bar when the lock bar is covered up, right? A liner lock being something like this guy. This is the Monterey Bay Knives EZC 1.5. Here, the lock bar is underneath this area, so I can't press on it no matter how I try. But, okay, centering is now vaguely off, which means that I need to tighten or loosen just a little bit in the back here, and then retighten. This will just take some of the tension out of the system, and, yeah, problem solved. Easy peasy. Pop loose there. Come on now. Lemon squeezy. Do I need to tighten this up a little more? The lock bar, the blade centering is slightly favoring the show side, which means that the lock bar is pushing it in this direction. So actually, this is telling me I should tighten this pivot just a little bit more here. Given that it is free spinning, that's not straightforward necessarily, but I'll grab my tool here and give it a twist. Let's not think too carefully about that sentence. And I'm just going to twist it until we are dead centered. There we go. On some knives, the centering of the blade here, I'm going to see if I can zoom in and show you this. Watch this. I'm going to loosen. See the blade move there? Now I'm going to tighten. Yeah, loosen, tighten, loosen, tighten. Yeah. In some cases, you definitely see this kind of thing, and so centering is more a question of tightness than it is anything. That's a possibility. Now what I want to do is, now that it's dead center, check the blade play. There is absolutely no blade play. There is, yeah, okay, we're good to go. Centering is golden. There we go. All right, pop loose. Beautiful. So first impressions on this guy are a couple of things. I mean, to start with, the build is great. This is a really, really nicely made knife. I believe this particular one was made actually by Rayot Knives. The Chaves has sort of subcontracted these out to Rayot. Rayot is a very, very well-known knife company in China. They do some really nice work, and we see indeed that they've done some really nice work. This is a very, very thick blade knife. This is a very, very thick body knife. This is just a thick boy generally. We go ahead and measure this guy up here. What we see here is that the blade itself, which has relatively little distance. I am zoomed way in here. Sorry about that. There is relatively little distal taper. That is shrinking the blade dimension toward that side. I'm going to use my little calipers here. And probably using them poorly. Sorry, machinists. Yeah, like 0.16 inches. That's thick, right? 0.158 is what I'm reading. It may be 0.15, but it's thick. It's a thick freaking boy. It's also a very heavy knife. Where is my scale? We are coming in here. I mean, the length on the blade here is not trivial either. We're looking at about 3.75 inches. And we're coming in here at 5.84 ounces. This is beefy. It's a big, thick old boy. So you got to really love that. And in fact, that's kind of my feeling generally. It's like this has an aesthetic that you have to love. You have to love the style, the big kind of slabby looking thing. You have to love the really thick blade. You have to love the skull clip. That's a sine qua non over there. If you're not in love with the skull, you're out of there probably. The other thing, there are a couple of other little issues. Like I said, there were some hot spots. Well, I didn't say this yet, but there are some hot spots. The back corner here. It's kind of assuming a certain kind of hand curvature that isn't necessarily always going to be found there. And then the other biggest issue for me is the fact that the blade is very close in the back here. It is definitely touchable, and even with relatively adult human-sized hands. I could see if I really got this super sharp cutting myself, because this is hanging on the side of your pocket like that. So this is one of the big problems that you get when you use really thick blade stock, right? It gets easier to touch the blade, and so you have less depth, basically, that you could do. This wouldn't have been a problem if the knife blade had been a little thinner, or if the angle had been different, but still. So that is kind of a major downside to that. The grind on this is really good. They come down, although right at the base here, it doesn't look super impressive. It comes out to a very thin little edge on this guy. I have to say, I have no complaints about the grind. This, even though it has big, thick blade stock, it cuts much better than you would expect, given that fact. And otherwise, it's very, very nicely made. The action is good. I can see this being very attractive to certain people if you don't mind this particular issue, and if you don't mind this particular... it's an issue for me. But otherwise, you have to love the aesthetic. That's kind of, I think, where my review's probably going to land. It's just like, interesting. You got to love it. And so, yeah. Anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.